Motherhood, but not quite as we imagine. Thought-provoking, refreshing, straightforward, sometimes taboo, often seemingly ordinary, but always honest. Welcome to School for Mothers, opening conversations we all need to have, exploring ways in which you can be fulfilled as a woman, once a mother. Now here is your host, mother of 10, Danusia Melina Durban.
Welcome back to another episode of the School for Mothers podcast. I'm your host, Danusia Melina Durban, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Before we dive into this episode, I want to invite all of you to the private School for Mothers Facebook group. If you're looking to join a community of ambitious women who have big dreams, big impacts, and children too, then look no further. With many, many hundreds of engaged members across at least 36 countries, we uplift, celebrate, and support one another. And along the way, we have a whole heckload of fun too. So find us on Facebook by simply searching School for Mothers Group. That's School for Mothers Group. We'd love to get to know you. Now then, this week, I am not going to tell you about Me Sheets sponsoring this episode. To hell with it. Go and have a look at schoolformothers.com/Me Sheets if you've ever wanted to have the devil to stay central in your own life. Really, Me Sheets work. And this week, I'm also not going to spotlight a listener, even though we've had people writing in. Thank you so much, by the way. We really appreciate you taking the time to be in touch. Next week, I'll share about it, because this week's conversation is really something I'm almost too excited for. So this week, it's Sally Blenkey as my special guest, and the episode is called EROTIC. But before we get to that, I want to tell you that Sally and my family share a tiny little secret. See, Sally is British, but she's lived in New York for quite a long time, like decades. Now, my daughter Harriet, who's my fifth child, she's my eldest daughter though, well, she went to a British girls' boarding school. It's called Westonbirt School. That's a big shout out to Westonbirt. Now, I'd like you to imagine a Hogwarts-style school. Truly, it looks like it. It's located right beside Highgrove, where Prince Charles and Camilla live. In fact, Harriet was head girl in this school. And this other little secret is Prince William and Prince Harry played tennis on the school courts and cycled around this area. And they're obviously still in the area a great deal. Well, anyway, the best bit is that Sally Blenkey was also head girl at this very school quite a while before my daughter was. And inside the inner hall, which is this spectacular, beautiful hall, there's these massive great boards with the head girls' names on them. Well, Harriet Melina Durban is on one board, and a few boards away, Sally Blenkey is as well. Now, isn't that a coincidence? And I love the fact that they both were schooled as leaders in the middle of the Cotswolds countryside. Just tickles me pink. So, let me tell you a little bit more about Sally Blenkey. She's the mother of two daughters, and she was the very first person to actually spray tan in the States. I think that's really cool. Anyway, she developed her own line of products called Brazil Bronze, and she sold her products on QVC and has spray tanned rather a lot of celebrity clientele. Now, I'm pretty sure we're going to talk about that. Let's see what she tells us on that. Anyway, after being around a lot of naked people, she formed her next company, Burlesque Bikini Boot Camp. That's a workout about feeling good in your own skin, using burlesque and striptease as a starting point. Sounds pretty good to me. I like the sound. Anyway, she founded the Pink Chardonnays. They were a touring burlesque troupe. And what I really love about the Pink Chardonnays is they feature women of all ages, shapes and sizes. So let's fast forward to 2017, and Sally started Serafina's World, which is a business creating parties and retreats for women and couples who really want to create more happiness in their lives by tapping into the healing and inspirational powers of the erotic. And that's where we got the name for this episode, EROTIC. So I won't keep you waiting any longer. Let's go ahead and jump into my conversation with Sally Blenkey about EROTIC. You probably don't realise how excited I am to be having this particular conversation, and there's a good reason. Today's guest is rather a stunning, oh my God, I don't even know how to describe her background. So we'll get to that together. But today, the title of the podcast is Erotic, and I'm in conversation with Sally Blenkey. So welcome, Sally.
Hi there. So happy to be talking to you, Danusia.
Oh, thank you. I know it's taken us a while to get here. Would you like to give the listeners a bit of an in on what you get up to in life? I mean, in general.
Well, I have kind of an interesting story. I'm a mother and an entrepreneur. I have two daughters, 13 and 18. And I was married for many, many years. And my original business was the first person in the United States spray tanning. And it became hugely successful. I sold my products on QVC and distributed the products worldwide. And I recently sold that company. And then I had a burlesque school in New York for 10 years, and I still produce burlesque shows. At the time when I got divorced, I started my own kind of accidental erotic exploration. And I guess all of the kind of like pent up things that most people do as a teenager that somehow or other had never happened for me because my parents had kind of kept me in the depths of the country in an English boarding school, which we can talk more about that later.
Yep.
I had like this huge kind of like unfolding of myself, maybe like, I guess probably like 3 years ago. And now my whole business is a company called Serafina's World, which is really about people and really primarily women finding a safe space to explore their erotic side. So there we go.
Wow. So how did you get from spray tanning to burlesque? I'm curious about that one to start with.
Well, that one's pretty easy. So in my spray tanning business, in the beginning, I was doing everything hands-on myself. And actually, it was a very interesting job because I developed a huge celebrity clientele and basically, you know,
Go on, name drop for us. Go on.
Jennifer Lopez, Hugh Grant, Ralph Lauren, the Kardashians, pretty much anyone that you would wish to see naked, Hugh Jackman, pretty much so many fabulous people. The thing that's interesting is, you know, getting a spray tan, it's not like getting a massage where you can just close your eyes and think of the queen. This, you know, you are standing up naked under bright lights, and it's quite, you know, confronting for people. So really, my business, like, I mean, to be honest with you, it doesn't really matter if someone's a celebrity. My business, what was enjoyable about it was just spending my days having amazing conversations with lovely women. And you realize how many people are so deeply discontented with their bodies. So every conversation would start with, you know, women apologizing. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Look at me. So much sadness and self-deprecation about their outward body. So just from that, I already had a passion of dancing. I was getting introduced to the world of burlesque myself. And it wasn't even so much that I liked burlesque, but I was like, wow, the body self-confidence that these women have, you know, there's something in that. And I just literally kind of overnight woke up and was like, you know what? I'm going to start kind of like a workout program for women that is filled with kindness and humor and really kind of embracing our body as it is today. Because, you know, tomorrow, we're going to be just a day older, 5 pounds heavier. So let's really kind of celebrate the womanliness we have today. And that was the basis of that business. Very fun.
I know. And didn't you make a TV series? Or tell me, I know I've got a little memory of something, Sally.
Well, we were on one reality show in the United States called A-List New York. And we made like a sizzle reel for a show that one of the major networks is sitting on right now. And let's see if it ever gets made. But it's kind of like that little kind of section of my life was wonderful. And in a way, I think it's led me to what I'm doing now. So to be honest with you, I would soon have a reality show about what I'm doing now, which I think would be much more juicy.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned about the step, isn't it? The steps from being in the company of naked human beings, women and men, and the revelations that inevitably they share whilst having that very intimate experience with you. And then, leading on to burlesque, the revealing of self, the gentle, slow, and often not gentle, but, that the revelation of that, of the clothing and of the body, it is fascinating. And then now to what you're doing, I have to confess, listeners, there was a time in New York that I dearly wanted to spray tan with Sally. And I'd not had one. And I've heard of her, her reputation and her immense skill. And I stripped nude for you, didn't I, Sally? Which, I'm just like everybody else, like, oh my God, really? Do I have to? But yes, I did. And then what happened?
Oh no, it's like highly embarrassing, but luckily I'm not in that field of business anymore.
No, but it is funny. It's actually funny because this is the one time I think you mentioned this has ever happened to you. And it was me stark naked in front of you.
Well, no, it happened one other time. It's really funny.
Oh, did it?
Anyway, and it's funny with a celebrity client, with Lindsay Lohan. So anyway, we went to this couple. Danusia disrobes herself, oodles of Danusia flowing luxuriously around and standing in a bathtub. And I aimed the gun at her delicious body and I was impotent. I failed to reach. Yeah, the gun broke. And the only other time that happened to me was in some very fancy hotel with Lindsay Lohan, but it was quite near to my salon. And she graced me with her presence in my salon later that evening. So, yes.
Wow. Then I'm absolutely privileged to have shared that type of experience with Lindsay. It's very funny. It's memorable. And it was a little chilly at the time, but I had to go without one day. But of course, you're not in that. So let's talk erotic and, what that means to you and why it's so important.
Well, I think that, one of the statistics, and I can't remember where it comes from, is that straight married women have the worst sex lives of anyone in the world. I'm not sure if any of the mothers listening, of course, some people have amazing sex lives. But if there is any demographic that doesn't, it's likely to be a straight woman and quite often someone who has kids.
Yeah.
So for me, like at the end of my marriage, I think I was someone who was very much, I'm 52 years old. I was raised very much to be the good girl. And I'm very much kind of a product of my generation. I was, raised to be very monogamous, and both of my marriages had been like that. And when I started, when I had my freedom and I started to get myself out there, and I found myself, I think I went through this phase, which a lot of women of my age and younger and older could relate to. I went through a huge phase at the end of my marriage of feeling very invisible, and especially invisible to men. And, once I started kind of like, meeting new people, getting kind of different kinds of attention, that invisibility started to fade away. And little by little, I kind of started to explore things that were interesting to me. So I happened to kind of meet someone who was into a very kind of open sexual lifestyle in New York. And to be honest with you, it wasn't like, my reaction wasn't like, oh, whoopee, this is amazing. Quite the opposite. It was actually very frightening to me because I was someone who was very sheltered, very inexperienced. Finally, kind of like I met someone that I really liked and was having that sensation of like, feeling loved and amazing sex. I had no reason in the world to want to explore. I was so happy with what I had. But I think that the fact that I was with someone who was interested in kind of like showing me different things, but with no pressure, if I wanted to, actually ended up being the biggest gift, because otherwise what I would have done, knowing my personality, I would have immediately got into the next relationship and recreated the exact same marriage or relationship that I was used to having that has an expiration date, because, like certain parts of you kind of get stuck. So, yeah, so as a result, like I was really kind of thrown into a world where, I would say like the first step of it was I heard about these kind of different erotic parties in New York. And I was like, oh, I want to see what that is. And truthfully, it wasn't because I was like so curious about those parties, but it was more I had a partner who was interested in it. So I wanted to please him. Then the thing was, when I went to those parties, I actually was a little bit turned off and actually disgusted by it. Like that was my true reaction. And the reason I was kind of turned off by it, I was like, I don't really think that this is that sexy for women. The world that I entered was a world that was really all about men, and women were really just being used as pawns. So for me, I started thinking, because there's that producer in me, the person who, produces all of these lavish, sexy, exciting burlesque shows. I started to think, as a woman, if I were redoing this for myself, how would I make it sexy? How would I make it playful? How would I make it erotic? How would I make it romantic for me as a woman? So, it's not me, Sally, the kind of, oh, let me go to this sex club in Paris. Let me go here. Let me go there. I came to it from a very different angle. It's like I went to those things and I was kind of turned off. And I was like, there should be something that's more kind of women derived here.
Yes, absolutely. There's so much that you've just said. I've been good not to say anything because it's so juicy what you've just said. I love the piece about invisibility. I'm curious, for a start, that's just one. Invisibility, was it that when you became less invisible to yourself, you became visible to others? Or is it something else?
It's so interesting, because I've noticed this like in my burlesque life as well, like coaching women to do burlesque, that, I feel like we go around and we kind of like think the world is sending us certain messages, or like our deeper insecurities within us, we're so willing to kind of confirm them. And then the minute we kind of light our own spark, so for example, in burlesque, it's kind of teaching women to kind of like dig into their own, a kind of little superhero version of themselves, and to kind of like really trust that they are kind of flirtatious, sexual, attractive, whatever that means to you, beings. And the minute a woman kind of understands that within herself and just practices trying it on with the outside world, like being a bit of a flirt, asking for more, being more clear in what you ask for, the minute you kind of turn that on within yourself, the world will respond. So it's really one of those, what comes first, the chicken and the egg? Because for me, like I'm an equestrian and I have a horse. And I was really at the point where I was like, Sally, it's time to move to the country and only see barn animals, because like how I felt about my life. But it really does take a leap of faith, if you're kind of like sitting at home with, like a baby, or especially in many of the reinventions of motherhood, it's so easy to feel turned down and to kind of like to trust that there's something else, that to trust that there's something bigger for you, to trust that there is the outside world sees you in a different way from which you see yourself.
Or that there is buried treasure within yourself that may at this point, particularly with young children, because it's so demanding on the body, isn't it? It's remarkably exhausting, and there is something within you. You might not have activated it before, in fact. So it might not be kind of waiting to be reactivated. It might be waiting to be found. Who knows? But there's many, many versions of this journey inside that is, as you say, a chicken and egg. Is it that the world behaves differently towards us and we see ourselves differently? Or is it that we see ourselves differently and become less invisible to ourselves? And then, of course, that has a very big impact on others in the world. It's wonderful. The other thing is, I am fascinated by your initial response to your partner wanting to go to parties and going to events and having a relationship model that would be very different than your own. And I'm wondering about that turned off piece. What was it? I mean, I get the piece about it's for men, men's enjoyment, men's pleasure, but help listeners enter that world that turned you off. What did you find?
So, I mean, like, I'm very well aware that, my background coming into this was very different from a lot of people's. So, a lot of people, have way more sexually diverse lives. Maybe before they're married, they experimented. Maybe they have a more open relationship. Maybe they have a really playful, loving relationship. Like, people come to this from so many different places. So for me, I was curious, I was curious. I wanted to see what it was. And also there's that part of me that I think, I'm so sexually open. I've heard about everything. I've read about everything. What could possibly shock me? But basically, I kind of feel like, so I'm going to tell you about kind of like the world that I stepped into. But the thing is, I've since then gone on a major exploration. And the great news is there are so many different things going on right now. It's not just the world that I had stepped into. The first parties I went to were more kind of like old school kind of swingery kind of parties.
Yes.
And, those parties are very much like, they're a space where a woman can be kind of used as a pawn. Often you see like these kind of like older, less attractive, middle-aged guys, with like the prettier trophy wife, or who knows, maybe the hired Russian prostitute. And it's very much just kind of like people kind of like switching. And I mean, like, there's just nothing romantic. It's actually, a lot of it to me is men kind of acting out their porn fantasies. And this is from someone who has, I actually I'm not someone who's really down on porn. There's a place for everything. But it's just like guys who they don't have to, like, say, when I was growing up, like before all online dating, you go out, you flirt, you dance, like you meet people. And, there's like an arc for a relationship where there's time for kind of sexual tension to build, where here in these kind of parties, like, it sounds fine. Let's just have an orgy. Let's just have like this feral sex. But there's just kind of, I don't feel like most women's minds work that way. Like, there needs to be room for seduction, for, I don't know. So for me, that paradigm was kind of like a turnoff.
Yeah, I get it. Absolutely. So this is the more stereotypical or kind of patriarchal model of erotic, rather than inclusion of any feminine fantasy or feminine focused pleasure. So it sounds much more like masculine focused sex, which pretty dull.
And also very easy for women to go along with, because, I think, when I look at my 18-year-old daughter's generation, they view the world very differently. But my generation, most of what we learned about sex, we learned from a man. And we're used to going along, and we're used to people pleasing. And like, it really is quite a stretch for a woman, especially a woman in relationship, to kind of think, what do I want? What's fun for me? What's sexy for me? First of all, to even think about that, and then to go and seek it out or to ask for it within a relationship. It's very complex.
Yeah, it is. There's so many scenarios where women have been taught and absorbed from all sorts of media channels, really, that we aren't the main protagonist. We are the receiver. We're the pleaser. We're the, that actual sexual power is, our sexual power is to be an object, to be the one that is pervade. Yeah. It's not agency. I think that's the word that I'm looking for. So our agency, our sexual agency, isn't the core that we've been sold. And of course, that's bollocks for a start.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I kind of feel like my new paradigm is to teach women how to be the leading lady in a script that they write for themselves.
Yes.
Because the old school is like, we're waiting to be picked. How do I please you? I mean, of course, not everyone. There are so many people who are amazing and strong, but there's also so many more people who, I don't know, I just see it in so many friends of mine who on the outside seem so modern and so fabulous, but still all of this stuff about kind of like waiting to be picked, the happy marriage, you know, these outside trappings, women still so often gravitate to that, and they're really kind of like shafting themselves.
Yeah, so self-worth is anchored in those patriarchal, again, those also misogynist kind of models of what it is to be female and to be sexual. And so for me, they also link to these Disney fantasy films, movies that downplay and actually a lot erase women's true power, not locating their true power, by the way, in only their sexuality. It's not. It's a false picture. It's fake. But we've bought into it because, you know, I mean, it's so pervasive that unless, you know, we really excavate that for ourselves, you know, and some women do, but there's a lot of punishment.
There's so much punishment because it's quite interesting because, you know, I live outside of New York City, in quite a small town. And it's kind of like for me to lead the life that I live. And I actually am very public about who I am. I don't really, like, I'm the face of my company. I really don't hide it. But like the judgment, the stigma, the scarlet letter that would chase me, you know, that I have to be like so kind of like strong in who I am, but it's also quite challenging, you know?
How do you stay strong in yourself?
Well, you know, I think that I'm very lucky, the kind of community of women that I surround myself with. So, you know, I travel in a lot of different circles, but I have a core of very strong, very intellectual women who all really kind of like keep one another buoyed up. So it's kind of like I have that supporting me, whereas I have actually, you know, kind of like, I kind of feel like I do hear the kind of like not so silent whispers. But at the same time, like everything that drives me, the same when I was doing my burlesque work, which even that was quite shocking, is I'm trying to think, I want life to be different for my daughters than it was for me. Like I want them to have different values about body image. I want them to have different values about work. I want them to live in a different world. So it's like I have to walk the walk.
Yeah, exactly. So you've surrounded yourself with these intellectual, strong women who are finding their voice and their power as sexual beings in the world in all sorts of ways. And you talked about that first encounter with this kind of lifestyle that was a turn on, but you also talked about that you found something very different. So open that world up for us, for listeners.
Well, my company is called Serafina's World. The first thing that we did was like, you know, we want to throw a party. And we wanted to throw a party that we would be very proud for women to come to. So the first thing was, it wasn't going to just be a swingers party. We went about like really like curating a guest list of many different types of people so that you know, a lot of people who were kind of curious, playful. You know, in my mind, I was like, I want to have kind of like a new version of Studio 54 in New York, like the most fun, playful party. But then I really want it to be something that women could come to as newcomers, having never graced, you know, done anything like this, and they could have a selfish experience for themselves. So the first thing that I did was within the parties, I created like a lot of diversions that women could do, even completely with their clothes on. So, for example, one thing that's very popular right now is the art of shibari, Japanese rope bondage. So I really found in New York some really, really amazing shibari artists. I found impact play artists, like that's, kind of like flogging, spanking, but people who did it in a very sensual way. So it's not about pain. It's about sensual domination. So it's kind of like creating a mind game with you. I hired masseuses. I hired very beautiful male dancers. I found an amazing party space with like a big wet area and jacuzzi and outside fire, and got beautiful DJs. And the whole thing was, there was a party, but there was like a little mini pleasure circuit within the party for women. And I would even, like, all of the newcomers, I would sit them down or get them on the phone beforehand and just say, I'd ask them a little bit about their prior experience. But I would say, basically, the first time you come to my party, even you see in a corner, a group of people having an orgy or whatever, I don't want it to be about you thinking that you have to do what they're doing. I want you to be selfish, and for you to do some pleasure research and really think what's fun for you. So just experiment. Feel how the shibari feels to be tied up. Feel what it feels like to be spanked or flogged. Feel like, what it's wonderful to have like a little sensuous massage that's just playful. It's not really going to go too far. And you could be dressed. You could be wearing your lingerie. You could be undressed. But the whole thing is, don't go too far. Just receive pleasure. And also think about, when you're tempted to go further, how is it going to feel like if I go home on my own, Or if you come with a husband or a boyfriend, receive all of those experiences, but the two of you be voyeurs. Maybe you just do something together. Like, don't feel like you have to go too far. Because I think for me, the secret behind everything, for a woman, for a couple, for a man, is what is the feeling that I am looking for? And that's such a complex question, and it's a question that could take you years to figure out. But just to come, rather than thinking, yeehaw, let me get my marbles off, let's be like more sensual. Let's like explore. Let's receive feelings. Because I feel like that for most women, sex is really, really emotional. And let it be about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So rather than that, the physicality being the dominant experience, to actually explore and do some really great, rich pleasure research around your feminine sexual feelings, what it evokes within you, I think also there's a piece about how, I'm totally shooting from the hip here. It's like, is this about also seeing what sexual power you have and the impact you have on others and the feelings of others?
Yes, definitely. And the one thing that I do feel, though, about a party setting, it's quite interesting because I was very lucky in New York. It's been about 18 months that I was throwing the parties. I had a close group of female friends, some coupled and some single, who started coming to the parties with me. And one thing that I really noticed, about 4 of my single friends who actually were in quite a similar place to me, feeling very invisible, coming to my parties was a really intense incubator. So, for example, things that, as a coach, I could say to them to practice in real life, in their dating life, it's quite a stretch on your own. But within the party setting, it was like being on steroids because, you could give them like a little homework about, sitting by the fire, meeting a guy, having a conversation, having a flirtation, but only letting it go so far. But in that world, people were able to just make huge gains and really see themselves differently. Like that invisibility just vanished in a heartbeat. And as the invisibility vanished, what took its place was this huge magnetism, like, a woman who really understands her sexual worth and her sexual desires and really kind of like has weight in them. And the one thing that's also really important is none of this has anything to do with like your age, your weight, your outside appearance. It's something that's so raw because everything has an equal and opposite, you know? But it was just amazing the things that happened in this year and a half for my circle of people. It's been a very interesting experiment.
Well, it sounds like it's a very primal, very sacred, deep piece of work that people, you know, both women and men are really undertaking, rather than a kind of just a wham bam, thank you ma'am, or orgy based kind of experience that doesn't really acknowledge the wholeness of human beings, the complexity, the fragilities of us all. And I can hear that Serafina's world potentially is, as you say, a playground and an incubator, particularly for women, to learn more about themselves. You do know my daughter is called Serafina, don't you?
Yeah, we have a lot of funny parallels. I was just thinking about that when you uttered the word.
Yeah, well, I actually found it quite difficult to say it in this context. Not because, and that's not a that's not a judgment at all. As you know, we wouldn't be having this conversation. No, it's just funny because Serafina's such a rare word. It's such a rare name, and for listeners, my understanding about Serafina as a name and as a word is that it's feisty angel and powerful angels. And it's got absolutely embedded in it, you know, this sense of power and force that is really crucial to what you're doing. And I have a quick question about what you're doing, actually, that came up when you were talking about, you know, giving homework to women to sit by a fire and flirt and not take it too far, etc., unless they wanted to, of course. Are your parties heterosexual?
Well, I would say that our parties, in New York, we call it sex positive, which means that everybody is welcome.
Yeah.
Having said that, I think that I curated my party to be of interest, you know, to kind of like the crowd of people that I'm mostly surrounded by.
Yeah.
So I would say that, you know, the majority of party goers at my party are heterosexual, bi women or bi-curious women, but no one would ever make anyone else feel uncomfortable. But I kind of feel like that is the demographic that mostly comes to my parties. And if someone, you know, like if someone talked to me and they were like they told me a little bit more about like their sexuality, you know, if they were visiting New York City, I could definitely recommend like different parties that they might feel more comfortable in.
Yes, got it. Yeah, it was just, it came up for me while you were talking. I was like, oh, it's something that I don't think I'd ever asked you, and I want listeners to be clear, because I think, you knowing the resources, the other places for people to go is important. And obviously in the show notes there'll be details of how to get hold of you, where you hang out in terms of, social media places and all those kinds of things. So it'll be covered that they can get hold of you, and maybe there'll be listeners. It's not all women. Interestingly enough, we've got, of course, it's School for Mothers and nothing about parenting, as you can hear. But nevertheless, we do actually have an increasing audience of men. And they tell me, they're learning what women want. Lots of them are with women. And I think that's wonderful. So it's partly why I asked. You mentioned the words selfish experience. Selfish, I'm so glad you said the word selfish and coupled it with experience, because for many, many mothers, they're like running in the opposite direction from the word selfish. Isn't it something that is one of the most shaming criticisms, critiques, and actually just horrible word to be given to anybody? And I wondered, what is it about selfish and erotic that's important here, or that we need to think about?
Well, this is interesting because it's kind of like a double-edged sword. The one thing I said before is the crucial question is, what is the feeling that I am looking for? What is the feeling that you're looking for?
Yep.
And, you know, that is the thing that I really want people to ask themselves, like, and, you know, we've started to do retreats to kind of explore that. However, one thing that I take very seriously if somebody comes to me as a couple is I really want to be very sensitive to how do you explore that together, because like I'm not that person who wants to kind of like do all this kind of deep digging up, heavy lifting work and just kind of throw a relationship away, because like that's kind of like messy and painful. And I think that there is a way to kind of do it together. But, you know, first of all, you know, you do have to be like a little bit selfish. So, you know, it's kind of funny. I kind of feel like when most people think about erotic or sex, those words have like a lot of charge, and there's, you know, like a whole kind of colorful picture about like what erotic and what sex means. But when we really dig down and we really try to think about the feeling that we're looking for emotionally, it really is in some ways quite separate from that outside image of sex, you know, like the scantily clad woman, the pulsing music, the lingerie, the sex toys. What we are looking for, the feeling that we're looking for, is something like very emotional and unique to us and very primal. And it has a lot to do with kind of like very profound emotional states that we want to experience. You know, maybe we really want to be nurtured. Maybe we really want to be babied. Maybe we want to be taken charge of. Maybe we want to be the one with control who dictates how something should be. But, you know, sex isn't the outside trappings. At its very center, it's these very, very deep primal needs. And a lot of them, the reason why it's tricky for mothers is because we have this outward role in life where we're the caretakers, we're the smoothers over, we're the fluffer, we're the nurturers. And we so often have embodied ourselves so much in those roles that we completely forget, who are we? Like, not only are we a mother, we're also maybe a child, a partner, a wife, a lover. And, you know, what do I, Sally, as a lover, who is she? What does she need? Which is completely different to me as the mum of my two girls. So I think like that's the kind of ball of wool we have to untangle. And it's very complex.
It is. It is very, very complex. But what's really wonderful is that when we allow ourselves to explore what feelings we really want within ourselves, as you just said, I mean, we spend our time taking care of everybody else's needs so often that we do negate our own a lot. It's built into the mother model, sadly. So as you spoke about wanting to be babied and nurtured and soothed, for instance, and rocked and read to and hair brushing and feet washing. And I mean, you didn't mention all those things, but as you spoke about them, these are the things that kind of rolled into my sense of, or being bathed, or, you know, that's just on that side. Or as you said, the kind of being the director, the more dominant force of, and I use dominant very advisedly because that's, you know, that tends to evoke very stereotypical behavior, but, you know, that kind of, or even adoration, worship, that doesn't fit all these porn stereotypes.
And also the other thing is, it's kind of like, if you think about, especially like as a mother or a working mother, you know, we have kind of fought in the workplace to be taken seriously. So asking for any of these things, it's almost like we're taking ourselves down a peg or two. So it also complicates matters because, for example, to be asked to be treated like a princess or a baby doll, that sounds so awful. It sounds everything against what we've fought for as women in the workplace, women to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
But I'm here
Yes.
to be a dominatrix in the bedroom, to be a baby doll in the bedroom, to be a princess. Nothing is wrong. Nothing is off limits. You are allowed to have all these different facets. But a lot of people, I don't know, are going to maybe judge me for that. But
really, I have a strong feeling that listeners will be absolutely fascinated as we open up. I really hope so. That's my intention, that in this conversation we open up spaces that aren't talked about, particularly in relation to mothers, because yeah, it's okay to be girl about town or single, woman without children. Oh, sure, you play, you actually get to revel. I'm talking about some attitudes, that I see in the world about, yeah, that's legitimate. But once you have children, no, your primary occupation, yes, is to serve the needs of the children and make sure that they're loved and cherished and all of that. And then if you're a working woman, as you say, to get out there and be the working woman that you wish to be. And we both know how hard that is in the world too. But this sensual, erotic side of mother gets overlooked, but by others, but also by self. It just doesn't often get airspace. So I personally am absolutely thrilled that we're opening this up and that you're doing this. It's so needed. And I know your demographics, not, all mothers. Well, that's obvious. But I'm guessing quite a lot of the women that you work with are mothers. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I feel like, when I entered this world, I already had like a very, I guess, from having, I had a burlesque school in New York for nearly 10 years, and I'd had my spray tanning salon for like 16 years. So I already was surrounded by like a huge community and a very diverse community of women. And I think that we can't help, for me, I've always created things that I'm curious about. So I feel like primarily I'm trying to do something for people who feel like me,
Yes.
So, there's definitely like a lot of mothers.
Yeah. How refreshing this conversation is. I'm loving it. It's really fabulous. It really is. And I've got a hunch that you might even bring Serafina's World to the UK.
I'm having a very exciting time right now. My partner and I, we may be getting our own physical club in New York. Mm-hmm. And I think that if that happens, the potential to do it in other cities would be amazing. Mm. But one of the very exciting things that we've been doing is we had our first retreat last year in Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. And that retreat really was just for women. And it was really on the subject of reinvention. And, my fantasy is for me and Danusia to do a retreat in London. But that retreat, it was called the Badass Bombshells Club. And so the subject of it was really kind of like, what is the feeling that you're looking for? And kind of like, who is, rather similar to my burlesque work, who is that kind of like inner superheroine within you? This kind of like larger than life version of yourself. And how do you kind of like develop your kind of sexual persona to really kind of excavate, who am I? What do I really want? When I take away, kind of like who I see myself of now, my regular kind of sexual routines and practices, what are the deeper emotional needs that I need fulfilled? And who is that woman? What does she look like in the world? Because then you have this kind of superheroine version of yourself. So on that day that you're feeling kind of old and tired and dumpy, you step into her shoes and you ask for the bigger things that she would ask for. And maybe you learn to ask more playfully, more sensually, and you start to build from the ground up this whole new life for yourself within the life you're already in.
Yeah, and I really adore what you've just said about building from where you are, as opposed to having to step away in order to be that bigger superheroine that already lives inside. It's not about destroying the life that you have, is it? It's totally having, by the way, I am realistic enough to know that some women do, having found that woman inside, do recreate a different kind of scenario for themselves and situation. But actually, that's not really the intention, is it? It's to excavate from where you are and live. And to actually have that as a resource, to have her, that core you, that core erotic self, to influence so many things in your life, every context, should you want it to. And I think that's the really thrilling thing. So, I mean, I have not missed your gauntlet that you just threw down, by the way. It was a very sexy gauntlet about London. And let me just say, it would be an absolute pleasure. That's right up my street. So, yeah, let's talk. It would be amazing. It really would. And I saw lots of the fabulous photos and etc. about Badass Bombshells Vegas retreat, and it looked a blast, absolute blast. So it would be a pleasure to do something in London. It really would.
Well, the one thing that was fun about Vegas was because the whole idea was to have a place where you were away from your family for 3 nights to really experiment with the kind of flirtation and communication skills. Mm-hmm. So our homeworks were things including going in a limo to a male strip club, because who eats to experiment on the male strippers? Frolicking at the topless pool, going to the casino tables, just this silly stuff, because sometimes you need to be very out of your real life to practice new habits, because you can make huge changes at your home with a journal, with a diary. But sometimes when you take yourself away for like a quick little shock, that's also good for the soul.
Oh, it's more than good for the soul, isn't it? It's revolutionary. It's transformational. And that's what sometimes we do need, a radically different context with fun homeworks, fun projects, little exercises that do surprise us, that we can accomplish. And therefore we realize, oh, I can do this. I've got this in me. She's here already. Didn't know that, which is really wonderful. Sally, I can't thank you enough for this fabulous conversation that's taken us to parts that, I am imagining some people don't go, some people don't talk about or even think about. So it's a total pleasure. I'm very grateful. Thank you for this lovely conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Danusia.
I hope to see you in London.
Yay!
Yay! Yeehaw, sister. Now that was one hell of a refreshing convo. Hot, hot, hot. I mean, here's to woman-centered pleasure, partying at a place we're wholly comfortable with, and healing ourselves through the full range of our feminine erotic power. Yes to all that. Before I tell you about next week's episode, I have a little tiny announcement. At School for Mothers, we really are wanting to provide a robust platform for and represent the lived experiences, beliefs, and voices of different mothers from all around the world. After all, there's absolutely no one-size-fits-all for motherhood, or feminism for that matter. So if you want to share your wisdom and story with ambitious women, mothers from all around the world, and you'd like to be featured on the School for Mothers podcast, why don't you write to me? Email me at podcast@schoolformothers.com. I really want to hear from you. That's podcast@schoolformothers.com. Anyhow, let me tell you about next week's episode. We're continuing with another magnificent mother rocking it out into the world. It's a complete privilege to host special guest Michelle Robinson in an episode called Stride. Michelle represented Great Britain at Olympic level and is now mother of 3 wonderful children. There's so much to say about Michelle. There really is. What I can promise is next week's episode will be, in Michelle's word herself, banging. I can't wait. Same place, same time. Meet me here. Thank you for joining us again. Have a super week. Here's to you.
Thank you for tuning in to the School for Mothers podcast. To continue the conversation and keep your dose of inspiration up, head over to schoolformothers.com/podcast, where you'll find bonus content from Danusia and a guest on habits, recommendations, books, best apps, time-saving secrets, life hacks, health, sleep and anything in between. That's schoolformothers.com/podcast.